My name is Ethan Collins, and I'm a 27-year-old who used to think he had his whole life figured out. I had a steady job as a software developer in Detroit, a comfortable apartment, and a circle of friends I'd known since college. But all of that changed on one fateful camping trip that I can only describe as a descent into pure, unadulterated horror. What I experienced in Michigan's dense forests has left me a changed man, constantly looking over my shoulder and jumping at every shadow. I'm sharing this story not for fame or attention, but as a warning to anyone who thinks the legends of monsters are just that, legends. It was late October, and the crisp autumn air had settled over Michigan like a blanket. The trees were ablaze with fiery reds and golden yellows, a beautiful sight that masked the terror lurking within. My friends and I had planned this camping trip for months, eager to escape the city and immerse ourselves in nature before winter set in. There were 5 of us: myself, my best friend Jake, his girlfriend Sarah, and our mutual friends Mike and Lisa. We were all experienced campers, or so we thought. Nothing could have prepared us for what awaited in those woods. We set out early on a Friday morning, our SUV packed to the brim with camping gear, food, and enough beer to last us through the weekend. The drive to the Huron-Manistee National Forest was filled with laughter and excitement. We sang along to old rock classics, shared stories, and speculated about the adventures we'd have. If only we had known that those carefree moments would be our last. As we drove deeper into the forest, the roads became narrower, and the trees seemed to close in around us. The GPS signal flickered in and out, but we weren't concerned. We had a physical map as backup, and Jake had been to this area before, or so he claimed. Looking back, I wonder if his memory had played tricks on him, leading us further into the heart of something ancient and malevolent. We arrived at our campsite in the late afternoon. The sun was already beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long shadows across the small clearing we'd chosen. As we set up our tents and gathered wood for the fire, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling that had settled in the pit of my stomach. The forest was eerily quiet. No birdsong, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just an oppressive silence that seemed to watch our every move. "Hey guys," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Doesn't it seem a bit too quiet out here?" Mike laughed, slapping me on the back. "City boy getting spooked already? Come on, Ethan. This is what real nature sounds like. No traffic, no sirens, just peace and quiet." I forced a smile and nodded, but the uneasiness remained. As darkness fell, we gathered around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and sharing ghost stories. The flames cast flickering shadows on the trees surrounding us, and more than once, I thought I saw something move just beyond the circle of light. But each time I looked, there was nothing there. It was close to midnight when we heard it, a long, mournful howl that echoed through the trees. We all froze, marshmallows forgotten on their sticks. "Was that a wolf?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Jake shook his head. "No way. There haven't been wolves in this part of Michigan for decades." "Then what was it?" Lisa asked, her voice trembling. Before anyone could answer, the howl came again, closer this time. It didn't sound like any wolf I'd ever heard. There was something almost human about it, a guttural, agonized sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Maybe we should head into our tents," I suggested, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. The others agreed quickly, and we doused the fire, plunging our campsite into darkness. As we scrambled into our tents, I could have sworn I heard the sound of heavy footsteps and branches snapping nearby. I zipped up my tent with shaking hands and lay in my sleeping bag, every muscle in my body tense. Sleep was impossible. Every rustle of leaves, every crack of a twig had me sitting bolt upright, straining my ears in the darkness. The howls continued throughout the night, sometimes far away, sometimes so close I was sure whatever was making them was just outside my tent. By the time the first light of dawn filtered through the canvas, I was a nervous wreck. I unzipped my tent and poked my head out, half expecting to see a scene of carnage. But the campsite looked undisturbed. The others emerged from their tents looking as haggard and sleep-deprived as I felt. "Did you guys hear that all night?" Mike asked, his usual bravado gone. We all nodded, exchanging uneasy glances. "Maybe we should pack up and head back," Sarah suggested. "I don't feel safe here." Part of me wanted to agree, to flee back to the safety of civilization. But another part, a part I didn't fully understand, wanted to stay, to investigate, to find out what was out there in these woods. "Let's give it one more day," I heard myself saying. "It was probably just some animal. We came all this way, we might as well try to enjoy ourselves." The others reluctantly agreed, though I could see the fear lingering in their eyes. We spent the day hiking, trying to shake off the unease from the night before. But as we walked deeper into the forest, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. More than once, I caught glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. The trees seemed to grow denser, the undergrowth more tangled. I realized with a start that I had no idea which direction we'd come from. When I mentioned this to Jake, who was leading our hike, he just shrugged it off. "I've got a compass," he said, pulling it out of his pocket. But as he looked at it, his face paled. The needle was spinning wildly, never settling on a direction. That's not possible," he muttered. As the sun began to set, panic set in. We were lost in an increasingly hostile forest, with no idea how to get back to our campsite. And somewhere out there, something was howling. "We need to find shelter," Lisa said, her voice shaking. "We can't be out here after dark." We stumbled through the gathering gloom, branches whipping at our faces, roots seeming to reach up to trip us. The howls were getting closer, more frequent. And now in the fading light, I could have sworn I saw pairs of eyes gleaming in the shadows between the trees. Just as despair was about to overwhelm us, we stumbled into a small clearing. In the center stood an old dilapidated cabin. Its windows were dark, the wood weathered and rotting in places. But it was shelter, and right now, that was all that mattered. We approached cautiously, calling out to see if anyone was inside. When no answer came, Mike tried the door. To our surprise, it swung open with a creak that seemed to echo through the forest. The interior of the cabin was dusty and cobweb-covered, clearly abandoned for years. But it was dry, and more importantly, it had walls and a door we could close against whatever was out there. We huddled together in the main room, using our flashlights sparingly to conserve battery. As night fell, the howls grew louder, more frenzied. They seemed to be coming from all around us now, as if we were surrounded. And then we heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps on the cabin's porch. Something was out there, moving around the cabin, testing the walls. We could hear sniffing, scratching, the low rumble of growls that were too deep, too guttural to be any normal animal. Sarah began to cry softly and Jake held her close, his own eyes wide with terror. And then, suddenly, it all stopped. The forest fell silent once more. We waited, barely breathing, for what felt like hours. Slowly, cautiously, I approached one of the windows, peering out into the darkness. What I saw will haunt me for the rest of my days. Standing in the clearing, illuminated by the pale moonlight, was a creature straight out of a nightmare. It stood on two legs like a man, but it was covered in thick, matted fur. Its arms were too long, ending in hands tipped with vicious claws. But it was the face that struck true terror into my heart. It was a twisted amalgamation of human and wolf, with an elongated snout full of razor-sharp teeth and eyes that glowed with an unholy, intelligent malevolence. A werewolf. There was no other word for it. All the legends, all the stories I'd dismissed as fantasy came rushing back to me. This creature, this monster, was real, and it was hunting us. As if sensing my gaze, the creature turned its head toward the window. Our eyes met, and in that moment, I knew it was aware of us. A slow, terrible grin spread across its muzzle, revealing row upon row of gleaming teeth. I stumbled back from the window, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. "We need to barricade the doors and windows," I gasped out. "Now!" The others, seeing the terror on my face, didn't question me. We moved quickly, pushing what little furniture there was against the door and windows. But even as we worked, we could hear more of them gathering outside. Howls and growls filled the air, punctuated by the sound of claws scraping against wood. "What are they?" Lisa whispered, her face pale in the dim light of our flashlights. "Werewolves," I said, the word feeling strange and terrifying on my tongue. "I know it sounds crazy, but I saw one. They're real, and they're out there." Disbelief warred with fear on my friends' faces, but the sounds from outside left little room for doubt. Something inhuman was trying to get in, and we were trapped. The night that followed was the longest of my life. The werewolves, for I was now certain there were multiple, circled the cabin endlessly. They threw themselves against the walls, making the whole structure shudder. Claws raked across the roof, and more than once, a furry arm smashed through a window, only to be withdrawn before we could react. We huddled together in the center of the room, armed with nothing more than some broken chair legs and a hunting knife Mike had brought along. We were hopelessly outmatched, and we all knew it. Our only hope was to somehow survive until dawn, praying that the creatures would retreat with the coming of the sun. As the attacks continued, we began to hear something else mixed in with the growls and howls. Words, distorted, guttural, but unmistakably human speech. "Come out, little piggies," a voice rasped, followed by a chorus of chilling laughter. "We only want to play." "Oh God," Sarah sobbed. "They can talk. How can they talk?" None of us had an answer. The very foundations of our reality were crumbling around us, replaced by a nightmare we couldn't wake up from. Hours passed, each minute an eternity of terror. The werewolves seemed to be toying with us, their attacks coming in waves. They would assault the cabin furiously for a time, then retreat, leaving us in tense silence before beginning again. During one of these lulls, Mike spoke up. "We can't just sit here and wait to die," he said, his voice hoarse. "We need to try to escape." "And go where?" Jake shot back. "We're lost in the middle of the forest, surrounded by monsters. We'd be torn apart before we made it 10 feet. "We have to try something," Mike insisted. Maybe we could make a run for it. Split up, try to confuse them." The idea was met with horrified silence. The thought of facing those creatures alone in the dark forest was almost too much to bear. But as another assault on the cabin began, the wood creaking and groaning under the onslaught, we realized we might not have a choice. "Okay," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "If we're going to do this, we need a plan. We'll wait for their next retreat, then we make a break for it. Run in different directions. Don't stop. Don't look back. Just run and pray." The others nodded grimly. We distributed what meager weapons we had, the chair legs, Mike's knife, a heavy flashlight. Then we waited, every muscle tense, for the next lull in the attack. When it came, we moved with desperate speed. Jake wrenched the barricade away from the door, and we burst out into the night. The cool air hit me like a physical force after the stuffy interior of the cabin. For a split second, I dared to hope. Maybe we'd caught them off guard. Maybe we had a chance. Then the howls began. I ran blindly into the forest, branches whipping at my face, roots threatening to trip me with every step. Behind me, I could hear the others crashing through the undergrowth, their panicked breathing and occasional cries of terror spurring me on. But louder than all of that were the sounds of pursuit. The werewolves moved through the forest with terrifying ease, their howls growing closer with each passing second. I could hear them calling to each other, coordinating their hunt with chilling efficiency. I don't know how long I ran. Time lost all meaning in that nightmarish chase. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but terror kept me moving. Every shadow seemed to hide a snarling beast. Every rustle of leaves promised imminent death. And then I heard a scream, high-pitched, filled with agony and cut off abruptly. I didn't know who it was. In that moment of pure animal panic, I didn't even try to identify the voice. I just ran harder, tears streaming down my face. More screams followed. The forest echoed with the sounds of my friends dying, their final moments a symphony of terror that I knew would haunt me forever. But still I ran. What else could I do? I burst through a line of trees and found myself on the edge of a cliff. Below, a river rushed by, its waters black in the moonlight. Behind me, I could hear the werewolves approaching, their excited howls telling me they knew their prey was cornered. In that moment, I made a choice. I'd rather die on my own terms than be torn apart by those monsters. Without allowing myself time to think, I leaped off the cliff. The fall seemed to last forever. The wind rushed past me, and for a brief, insane moment, I felt almost peaceful. Then I hit the water, and the cold shocked me back to reality. The current was strong, threatening to pull me under, but some instinct for survival I didn't know I possessed took over. I fought against the water, managing to keep my head above the surface as the river carried me swiftly away from the howls of frustration echoing from the clifftop. I don't know how long I was in that river. It could have been minutes or hours. All I know is that eventually I washed up on a rocky shore, battered, freezing, but alive. As the first light of dawn broke over the trees, I dragged myself onto land and collapsed. I was found later that day by a search and rescue team. Apparently, when we hadn't returned to our campsite, the park rangers had been alerted. I was the only one they found. My friends were gone. In the days and weeks that followed, I tried to tell people what had happened. About the werewolves, about the hunt, about the horrors we'd faced in those woods. But no one believed me. They said I was in shock, that I'd imagined it all to cope with the trauma of getting lost in the forest. They told me my friends had probably fallen victim to a bear attack or gotten separated and succumbed to the elements. But I know the truth. I know what's out there, hiding in the dark places of the world. And I know that one day they'll come for me again. Because once you've been marked by the werewolves, you're never truly safe. So I'm sharing my story now as a warning. If you value your life, your sanity, stay out of Michigan's forests. Don't dismiss the old legends and campfire tales, because sometimes the monsters are real and they're hungry.